Welcome back everyone to session 8. Thank you very much for attending. It's always good for speakers to actually have someone to speak to. So tonight we've got two areas and two speakers. One is Bruce Chatterton, who's going to talk about open philately, and the second is Ian McMahon, who we've had a couple of times, who's going to do all the non-FIP classes minus topical. So that should be a good coverage. So Bruce has been involved with the APF and a project officer for Open Philately for quite some time. I first met Bruce when he came to Mandurah in 2010, so we've had a long relationship with Bruce. He's before that was living over in New Zealand, but we accept him as one of our own, even though these days people chop and change depending on where they are. So on behalf of everyone, Bruce, I welcome and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to all those that are wanting to judge or wanting to even guide exhibitors, because it's really, to me, it's a combination of both. The presentation tonight will be based on some basics out of the FIP Open Philately presentation, which they've tended to be all words. So I've tended to try and get some examples in so we can sort of talk about what those words mean, and just maybe a bit of discussion around judging experience in Bangkok last year. Open is still a very new and evolving process. So we might just, if I do this properly. There we go. So as I said, it's been around for a wee while, but really only became serious in 2022 with the establishment of the idea of a commission. A working group, which is basically largely based in Europe, has been given the job of coming up with a new set of guidelines. The previously existing ones were last out in 2018. They're a wee bit dated. And the plan was to get them through a Congress in 2024, but the working group's now been told they won't be discussed until 2026. So there's still some time away. I think what will happen, though, is in the meantime, we will slowly move towards those guidelines. Certainly at an international level, the feedback to jurors will be based upon where it's evolving to as opposed to where it was, even if we don't mark accordingly at the time. So to me, open philately is as much about embracing non-philatelic material as it is philatelic material. And so that's the primary difference of it. It's all of the range of philatelic material, but you're allowed to have open material like anything else that's not dangerous, not explosive, not too bad. The trick with open philately is to describe both types of material well and ensure that you blend them properly so you don't have a chunky looking exhibit. The critical thing is really the non-philatelic material should support the philatelic material and the story that you're telling with your treatment. And if it doesn't do that, then it's going to be a very clunky exhibit, which will be unfortunately not doing very well. There's a few basics about open and all other exhibits. And just because it's a different class, a lot of those basics don't change. So your exhibit can be however you want to deal with it. No big issue about that. Title page still needs to have a purpose and a plan, and statements about personal research and rarity, have a bibliography. And to be fair and honest, those things are missing in a lot of our exhibitors these days. Doesn't matter what class they're in, but open, certainly in Bangkok, a number of people had a number of those things absent. Your philatelic items in your exhibit need to have proper philatelic descriptions, as would be presented in the philatelic class they would normally be presented in. The critical one to me is the non-philatelic items. They've got to be described in a way that makes them relevant to your exhibit and appropriate to your exhibit. And I've got some examples of that later on. But just because your exhibit is on German Feldpost having a badge that's from a German Feldpost official, unless it's actually described and it's relevant in the part of the exhibit it's in, it's padding or it's inappropriate. So yeah, it's how do you integrate the material and how do you describe it to make it relevant to the story you're telling. This is a bit of a commentary added today, just thinking about it. I'm currently trying to mentor one guy who's into Antarctic philately, and he goes weak at the knees when he starts talking about Shackleton or Robert Scott. And so he tends to have his text full of words like amazing and wonderful and inspiring and stuff like that, which it's probably not really appropriate, even in a storyline, not when you're gushing like that for 3 or 4 pages. So my comment would be, and Glenn or Ian can snap me off at the knees if I'm wrong, but try and avoid the really emotive stuff in your presentation. It looks like you're terribly engaged and maybe missing the ability to really explain the material very well. The same applies to item descriptions. You still see the odd example where a guy's just copied and pasted, or a girl has just copied and pasted the auction catalogue description for their key item, and it's got words like extraordinarily rare or outstanding example, or they put the catalogue value into their description because they've just copied the whole sentence out. I know it's basic, but you still see that a wee bit in open class. Particularly if it's non-philatelic material, because the individuals often buy that for their exhibit and really perhaps don't know how to explain it properly. So that's the quickest way to do it. And the last bit, I'm sure, Glenn, you've covered off, just descriptions of rarity. My same Antarctic explorer is adamant that his glass slide from 1900 showing a Belgian explorer of the time is very rare, and he wanted me to highlight in his exhibit, and I said, mate, there's 5 of them available on eBay. So no, it's not rare. It doesn't matter how much you think it is. So a couple of little things just outside open class. But so the material, open philately exhibits may, and they don't have to, include all types of philatelic material. And some exhibits will weigh heavily in one direction or another because of the catalogue, or the subject or the chronology or whatever else it is that you're showing. So it may not necessarily be all types of philatelic material. And of course, may include non-philatelic material. May is probably a bit irrelevant there. It has to include non-philatelic material because otherwise it wouldn't be in this class. And that excludes dangerous and prohibited material. So things like live bullets and those sort of basic things that somebody might decide are relevant can't be included. And non-philatelic material must be relevant to the chosen subject. And there's a whole range of it. I've just included a list of stuff that I've encountered in developing my own exhibits or seen in other people's exhibits. And as you can see, there's a whole raft of it. In Bangkok, we judged one exhibit which was principally postal history, but he wanted to include 2 photos in his exhibit. So he put it into open. Now, it really isn't an open exhibit. It's a postal history exhibit. And he would have done a lot better in postal history. His treatment was open, and it made it really hard to sort of try and move it. So it's a balance that's required. So the material range, these are a couple of examples out of the FIP presentation. So we've got the inside page of a book that was relevant for this particular exhibit, with some nice philatelic material supporting it. On the right-hand side, you've got a newspaper article, and you've got a QSL card, which, because it's showing the front of the page, it's a non-philatelic item, and so it's quite a good balance of material on that to go with the other material on the page. To be fair,
Bruce?
Yep.
Excuse me, Bruce.
Yes.
What's the title of the actual exhibit?
Which one?
The one you're just showing. What's it about?
They're pages from 2 different exhibits. So the one on the right,
I see. Sorry. Yeah.
right. So the one on the right's a medical exhibit.
Thank you.
All good. Do you want to mute yourself, Diane, just for this one?
Oh, sorry, I can't find it.
There you go. Done it. Well done. So carrying on, this is a page out of Berta King's Denmark World War II exhibit, occupation by the Germans. And so this particular page is about 1944 episode where a number of the resistance movement was killed. So the left-hand side, upper left, is actually a celebration of the birth of one of the royalty, because they were not permitted to do that by the military. So they put a flyer out. And the next item over, the brightly coloured sort of three-striped, is a set of labels that were produced celebrating something else. But again, you got the front of the postcard at the bottom. You've got a range of non-philatelic material on the page. And to be fair and honest, a lot of open class exhibits early on used postcards as their non-philatelic material. And we'll talk about that a wee bit later on, because it's sort of evolved from there a long time since. This is just a collection of bits and pieces that relate to an exhibit I'm slowly growing. I think I used that photo in an article I did for Stephanie a couple of 3 years ago, but there's a whole range of different things in there, from wage books to photos to mess tickets to a whole lot of other things, and that all allows you to build a story. It's a wide range of material, and you can really, providing I was to go and put that together in a sensible fashion, develop something that's coherent and useful. So in terms of judging it, the philatelic material must be at least 50% of the exhibit. And the non-philatelic material may be up to 50% of the exhibit, but it doesn't have to be 50%. It might be 20%, it might be 25%. And we have seen already exhibits where the non-philatelic has been over 50%. And you're already automatically in trouble, because you've sort of gone past whether it's a philatelic exhibit anymore. And the judges, we had one example of that in Bangkok, and be fair to say, it's really hard to give a guy a good mark or girl a good mark when the exhibit is struggling to meet the basic principles. And the non-philatelic material, the variety of it is important. Again, as I made the comment earlier, if you don't have a range of material, it's a very one-dimensional or two-dimensional exhibit. And it certainly affects the judgment of treatment, because it suggests you may not have really put the effort into finding the material to support your exhibit, and the material component will get marked accordingly. All philatelic material must be original. Now, the non-philatelic material should be original where at all possible. And I've put an example of something on the right-hand side there. There are a limited number of copies of this available in the world. And if you find one of those in the bottom of a box at Grandad's place, I don't think you're going to be putting it in your stamp exhibit. It's probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the point being made in these seminars is basically there will be some items that the original is a one-off, but you probably still need to show it or parts of it for the development of your exhibit. So it is okay to show a scan or a facsimile or something to at least represent a key document or a key bit of material to help your exhibit develop. It is where at all possible needs to be original. Some exhibits have a lot of scan stuff in them. It becomes really problematic, but if it's a key item, that's all very good. Again, stressing the need for non-philatelic material to have a bit of a variety in it. Criteria for evaluating the open exhibits. I'm just going to do something here that's better. Obviously, title and plan 10. We'll talk a wee bit about some of these in more detail, but I'm pretty much picking that the basics of title and plan and treatment have been covered previous classes, and whilst there's one or two things we can talk about, open doesn't really have a huge deal of difference in those, providing the material supports the treatment. Knowledge and research, that's the other areas I will talk a wee bit about, and condition rarity at the back end, I'll talk about those a wee bit as well. So this is one of the slides that was shared with us in Bangkok at the FIP presentation for Open Class, and it's trying to get people to understand the difference between knowledge and research. So knowledge you can find out, and it's pretty well known, and as it says, it's a collective knowledge gained from books or whatever. Research is actually taking that knowledge and doing something with it to enhance your exhibit or to develop new knowledge, i.e. you put together a whole string of things and go, hang on a second, there's a link between this, and this that hasn't been previously written about, and here's the proof of it. That's knowledge and research in a nutshell. And it's important that you make a statement in your exhibits about the personal research you've done so that you can benefit from, I suppose, your enthusiasm for the subject you're talking about, and also share that knowledge with other people so it becomes a bit more assimilated or socialized, so that others can also pick up and maybe help develop in that area. It's being put up here just as part of the process, really, to explain the difference, because a lot of people rely on what they've read in other books and they think that's knowledge, and it is to a minor extent, but personal research and research is where you've taken that knowledge and done something with it. Description of non-philatelic material. This is we talked about earlier. This is how you pass on your knowledge and you integrate your material into your exhibit to make the point you're trying to make in that exhibit page or within that section of the exhibit. And as I said, there used to be an exhibit on the American Civil War, which we might have seen 10 or 15 years ago, where the last frame was basically a wooden box full of bullets and bits of other pieces, all very relevant to the subject, but didn't really integrate into the exhibit. And when I talk about chunkiness in a minute, that'll be one of the things that I'd recognise. So here you've got descriptions of the non-philatelic material that explain what it is that's being shown and how it integrates into the exhibit. So the coin at the top right is a commemorative for one of the first Danish resistant groups, and that's in the section in Burger King's Danish World War II, and it's in the resistance section of that. The decree on the right, the left, I mean, sorry, tells you what it is, explains how it was relevant, and again, it's in the right section of the exhibit for that explanation to be relevant. The other two items come out of my own exhibit, really just describing what they are and how they tie in. So you don't need a hugely technical explanation, but you need to explain what the item is and how it ties into your point you're making on that page. So some questions that commonly come up. How are postcards treated in an open exhibit? Because as I said earlier, a lot of people rely on postcards for non-philatelic content. The principle is basically if the picture side is shown, it's non-philatelic. If the address side is shown, the item is philatelic. And to be fair and honest, I made the comment that most postcards in open exhibits are non-philatelic because the address side is usually of no importance. But you can see the postcard on the right, that's actually talking about the referendum in SAR as part of an open class exhibit. So the postmark and the stamps and stuff are all quite relevant. So it's possible to go both ways, but that's the simple nub of it. If you show the picture, it's non-philatelic. If you show the address side, it's philatelic. And if you're trying to do get a balance, that can be an important consideration if you're relying on postcards. Perhaps the other one that people get a bit screwed up on is how do I measure the philatelic content in relation to the non-philatelic material? And a lot of people agonize and go through and count it page by page, or they do an assessment of the area on each page and all the rest of it. The current thinking is don't try and work out the percentage of the items in your exhibit, so don't count them and divide them by the total number of items. Don't try and work out how much of each page has got a non-philatelic item on it. The aim is to step back, look at the frame, and does it balance the exhibit, and is the material within the exhibit balanced between philatelic and non-philatelic without the non-philatelic material overloading the content. The reason being that if it's too much, then it's no longer a philatelic exhibit. And I suppose these are sort of two fake 16 frames just to represent it, but you can see the one on the left, very chunky, not a great distribution of material, and you'd have to think that a bit like the bullets one I talked about earlier, it's not blended very well into the subject matter, whereas the one on the right probably has a better blend of material through the exhibit. It's not 50%, but there's enough of it there to support the story, whatever the story is that we're trying to tell. So yeah, it's trying to get your material through your exhibit and sympathetically sharing it within the exhibit rather than chunking it up. The FIP qualifying seminar from Thailand is in a PDF format available on the FIP website. So a lot of the stuff that I've shown tonight are derivatives of slides from that. It was a pretty well attended seminar, and yeah, I think the one thing I was perhaps a wee bit disappointed with, it was a 70 slide slideshow, but a lot of it was about some of the basics of exhibiting as opposed to really getting down to the nitty gritty and open. But I suspect some of that is because the nitty gritty of what happens in open is still being sorted out. But I'd use that as a reference if I was a judge. Just have a look at it. There are some critical bits and pieces in there, and the background to other commentary is around treatment and all the other things is quite relevant, irrespective of what class you're judging in. In terms of the Bangkok experience, I think we only had about six or seven open class exhibits. There was an interesting range from being too much non-philatelic, or a frame of philatelic by 2/3 of a frame of non-philatelic by another mixed frame by, so that whole blend of stuff was missing. People were reluctant to describe their non-philatelic items, and so that tended to mean that they got bogged down in just putting it on the page and assuming everybody could know why that was relevant. Didn't always work. But there was also a couple of very good ones. There was one on the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, where the material range was awesome and storyline was pretty thorough. Tended to get their pages a wee bit full, a lot of material, and trying to work out how the story flowed on a particular page was a bit interesting, but that would have been the better one we saw out of the ones that were up there. And I think it was recognised as such. To be honest, everybody, that's me. I don't know whether there's some comments or questions. I'm sure there'll be something, but that's the talk. May not have lasted 45 minutes, but we're in business.
No, it's fine, Bruce. Now's the time for people to ask questions. So if before Bruce goes off and cooks dinner or gets dinner cooked, if you've got, I think, Bruce, you covered that pretty succinctly. You know, I'm hoping that we're not getting death by PowerPoint for these guys. So you really got into the nitty gritty, and I think that's a great job. Thank you. So is there any questions for Bruce?
No, just to tell everyone, I'm not hiding. My camera's just gone, so I can see you, but you can't see me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Bruce, can I include banknote? He says coins, but can
Yeah, anything like that. Basically, as long as it's not dangerous. you're fine. So banknotes, propaganda, even newspaper articles about the release of something, all that sort of stuff. Yep.
It has to fit in the frames. I'd make another comment that if you're going in or out of Australia, you should avoid things that customs might, or quarantine, sorry, might not like.
Yeah, correct.
Although with New Zealand exhibitions, we've had an agreement that in that case, a scan of that page would be used. And when you're mounting medals and coins, which can be heavy, you need to be careful to mount them properly so they don't fall down.
Yeah.
Well, the exhibitor needs to mount them heavily rather than the judge, but otherwise, yes.
Yeah, I've got a question, Bruce.
Yes.
Some of the open exhibits I've seen, the amount of material they pack on the page is unbelievable. Is there a sort of an aesthetic there about crowding or?
Yeah, basically, if it's getting too crowded, it's like any exhibit. It needs to be balanced on the page and it needs to be sensible. So if people are ODing on trying to get as much on the page as they can, it's a bit like showing half a block, showing half a sheet, then a block of forward be enough. You can OD on it and it doesn't necessarily do good.
Yeah, thank you. And the related question, are you allowed to overlap material?
Yeah, it's like everything. You can overlap it, but sometimes that impacts on your treatment.
Right, yeah.
So if you're not, in some big items, it will be difficult. But then if they're a really big item, probably they don't need a lot of other stuff on the page with them. So it goes back to how much you're trying to fit in and how sympathetic is your treatment of the material. If you got to slam a lot of it on a page, you're making life difficult for yourself and for the judge.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
What about windowing, Bruce? Is that something that is happening and open?
Yeah, it's the same as any other. I window stuff in my exhibits, open as well, because you may not want to show the whole page of stuff, or windowing might allow you to get the relevant piece of the text on the page that wouldn't otherwise be seen. If you try to display the whole newspaper item or the whole leaflet, because some of that stuff's bigger than A4, so you have to window to show the piece that's relevant to the point you're making.
Yeah, that's good. You also referred to you can scan, the odd unique item was something. Is there a number of scans that's acceptable and not acceptable?
No, that's very much up to the judge, but I would also say that if you've got to have more than one or two scans in more than one or two scans of an item that you can't get, your exhibit's becoming problematic because you're struggling to get the material for it. But there are some things that you will have to do, and maybe one or two.
Yeah.
People probably need to get away from the habit of scanning something and matting it or putting it in a box, because that means you're sort of almost presenting it as an original.
Charles, can you look it up on Google?
Look up what?
Oh, sorry. Am I? Oh.
Come on, Charles. Listen to you, Mrs.
And one more question, Bruce. Maximum cards, we see them as philatelic. Would you put maximum cards in to tell your open story?
Yeah, they're fine. Look, they're a philatelic item. They're a class. They're you're more than welcome to include them, and sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
I'm playing with one at the moment where I've got to put a maxi card in. It's fine.
And what happens if you're only describing the picture of the maxi card as part of your story rather than the whole maximum card for your story?
You're generally okay with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, if it's a maximum card, there should be a bit of congruence between the postmark, the stamp, and the picture anyway. So if that doesn't happen, it's not really a maximum card anymore. It's just a postcard with a stamp on the outside of it. So.
Yeah.
Kia ora, Bruce.
Kia ora, mate. How are you?
Good. Can you comment on rarity statements for non-philatelic material?
Yeah, they're a tough one. And look, to be fair and honest, my advice always is, the subject. You be rational in how you apply it, but you have to apply in a lot of cases your own knowledge, Denise. The
But
reality
as a
is,
judge, from a judging perspective,
from a judging perspective,
are we, like, you've got some marks to allocate? Do you allocate half the rarity mark to non-philatelic and half to philatelic, or?
no, because then you're basically you're making a call. You have a wee bit of that going on, but it's one of those tough ones. You look at the exhibit, generally looking for thoroughness of application. So if they've highlighted rarity in the same way through the exhibit, you're looking for volume. Is it applied sort of across both philatelic and non-philatelic material? Because some exhibitors will have great philatelic rarity and nothing in the other side of it, but that might be relevant for the story they're trying to tell. So if I was doing an open class 1 on, say, smoking, or the history of tobacco, the philatelic material for that could be quite rare because it could go back 3 centuries or 4 centuries. But, a packet of cigarettes or whatever else, they're probably relatively cheap, but the depth of the material would be judged across both. And you have to assume.
Would in some cases the exhibit be better than to just be a thematic exhibit if the non-philatelic material is very weak?
If the non-philatelic materials, yeah, potentially, but I'm not even going to go there because I stay well away from thematic just because I'm not going to upset anybody by commenting on it, but I just find that it would do my head in trying to comply. But yeah, you're right. If there's really weak, if it's really weak in the non-philatelic material, you've probably got an exhibit that should be somewhere else. And
Yeah.
one thing I didn't mention earlier, Glenn, sorry to cut you off, mate. Try and keep your descriptions. I got told off once because my exhibit was quoted as being a postal history exhibit. They had a whole lot of open class material added to it because my some of the material was postal history, and they said, well, you've described everything in a postal history fashion. I just happened to choose a fairly generic way of doing it. But anyway, for what it's worth, yeah. Sorry, Glenn.
Yeah, no, and also I think for the judge's point of view, you do have to do a bit of extra research when it comes to open because you're not just looking at philatelic material you may see, but the non-philatelic. I mean, I had an example where I saw a letter from Florence Nightingale, extremely rare letter. I just happened to be watching the Antique Roadshow 2 weeks before, where they're explaining that she was writing 3 and 4 letters every night for the entire time she was out in the field, trying to get more money, et cetera, for the campaign. So that wasn't, I mean, if I hadn't have seen that, I would have agreed with the statement. So I think it's up to the juror to try to get at least some handle on the topic that they're going to look at. It's a tricky one because you can't look up a non-philatelic book on a subject. They don't exist. But yeah, I think open judges have to try to get familiar with whatever subject's going to be presented to them. Any other questions we have for Bruce? Seems like you nailed it for us, Bruce. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and everything. And will we see you in Canberra?
Yeah, mate, I'm judging this. I hope so.
All right. So if anyone's got any other questions.
Nervous if you got a postcard exhibit. Don't worry about open class. I'm not looking at that. But...
All right. Thanks very much, Bruce. All right.
Cheers, have a good night.
I'm going to ask Ian to share his screen. And Ian needs no introduction. We've seen him a few times, so take it away, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I've got the job of going through the leftover classes, but they're not really leftover classes. Some of them are quite interesting. So in many ways, it'll be a quick run through them. A couple of the classes in some ways have quite complex rules, which particularly first aid covers, which I won't go to in detail, but we'll see how we go. First of all, a general comment on national classes. These are classes that are classes in Australia. They may have similar classes in other countries. For example, New Zealand has polar as well, and first day covers have been a class in the US and Canada for some time. Each country, though, usually will have different rules, which they have developed. One thing that's interesting about these national classes is that a number of them over the years have actually become or are on the way to becoming FIP classes. So one of them was that we had a social philately class in Australia for a long time, and the rules from that class heavily influenced the social and historical studies subclass of postal history, because the chair of the commission was Malcolm Groom. Similarly, open and picture postcards have now become FIP classes, and first day cover class is an experimental class at the FIP exhibition in China, in Shanghai in November. One class that I don't think, I'm not sure of any other country that has it, is the Frugal class. This was established many years ago because exhibitors and potential exhibitors were complaining that it cost too much to exhibit, the material was too expensive. And it was established to try and prove to people that you could develop a very good exhibit, even though the material you used was of limited financial value. And that really the key to it all was that material can be rare but not expensive. So there's still the challenge of finding the material. And a lot of the points that are associated with exhibiting are attached to things that come from the exhibitor themselves, the treatment, the knowledge and research. So the first thing with Frugal class is that we don't really have to look at any rules, because the material's judged in the class that, if you like, that it's entered in. So a Frugal exhibit can be in any class, with the exception of youth and literature. So if you put in a traditional exhibit, it'll be judged as traditional, and open as open, etc. The difference comes in that after it has been judged, then the jury, usually when I've done it, it's the jury secretary, but it could potentially be the team leader or the jury chair, will get a small panel together, and they're usually one or preferably two, maybe even three dealers, who are then asked for an estimate of the value of the material. And the value is the wholesale value, not what the dealers themselves might charge. And if the dealer comes up with a value of more than, for a fly frame exhibit, $1,000, then there's a penalty attached to the result that you've got, an average of $200 per frame, and then there's a penalty if you've exceeded that. We haven't had, sorry, wrong way. We've attracted very few entries in recent times. There were a bit of a flurry at the beginning. It's meant to be offered at every full national and at least one of the half nationals every year. But I think the last entry was actually in 2022 in Canberra in the Fiji Architecture Definitive Series. A quite interesting definitive series in the way that Fijian definitives are, with a lot of watermark and other variations, but not a very popular one, and not of large value. I must admit, whenever I've asked the dealers for estimates of the value, none of them have exceeded the value limits, but it is possible. Remains to be seen whether we'll see any at Sydney 2025. One thing Frugal is good for, and it's not so much now, but once upon a time, your office waste bin would require all sorts of interesting covers and stationery and whatever else. And Frugal would have been a suitable class for what might be called office waste bin collections. Any questions on Frugal, I think?
Yeah, Ian, more of a comment. We did have that exhibit in Sydney, I think 2007, somewhere around there, where the guy did the stuff as he was a cleaner, and I don't know if it was Tonga or Samoa or one of those islands, the stuff that he got out of a waste paper bin while he was a cleaner in the hospital. And the dealers are going, I've never seen this stuff, and I'd be paying a fortune for it, you know. So even though
that's right.
he paid nothing for it.
No, but
you've got to be a bit careful.
You've got to be a bit careful because it is the wholesale value, and particularly if a popular country like a Pacific island like Tonga, it's quite possible that you might exceed that value.
One question, Ian.
Yes.
So it's Frugal. Is it still under a specific class like postal history or traditional in the treatment of it, or?
So, as I said, the entries in the class can be in any of the other classes except for literature or youth.
Right.
So if you enter postal history, then it's judged as postal history.
Yeah.
If it still will be listed under the Frugal class, but the judges will decide whether it's open or thematic or topical or whatever else. And the judging sheets that you would be given actually reflect that, at least using exhibition aid. There are separate different judging sheets for Frugal, traditional, Frugal, postal history, Frugal, thematic.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Now, the next class is one I'm not very familiar with, and it has, I think, a quite complex set of rules and guidelines. So I'm not going to get into the great detail that the rules and guidelines get into. If you are going to judge it, then I think you're going to need to read the guidelines and work through them. But at its essence, it's relatively straightforward. But I think because it was a new class, the people who wrote the rules originally wanted to be clear what they were talking about. But what is a first day cover? What can be included in the class in the material? So a cover to which stamps have been affixed and postmarked by the issuing postal authority on the date of issue of the stamps. Well, I think most of us would understand a first day cover as just that. The stamps on a cover with a relevant postmark. The wording seeks to make it clear that the postmark has to be an appropriate postmark of the postal authority. So there are quite a few hand stamps around that might look like postmarks that are not actually postmarks, and they can be used for tourist venues overseas where you might get something that might look like a postmark and have a date, but isn't actually a post office hand stamp, date stamp. It also makes the point that they have to be legitimate stamps issued by a postal authority. So that brings us to the Cinderella class that's coming later. And the date of issue has to be the date of issue, of course, to be a first day cover. Although even that can sometimes be debatable as to what is the date of issue. It can be similarly a postal stationery item postmarked on its date of issue. The other part of it is that it can also be a souvenir cover to which stamps have been affixed and postmarked on the first day of use of the souvenir cover, or a cover with stamps affixed and postmarked on the first day use of the postmark. So if there's a commemorative postmark, you can have a collection of commemorative postmarks on cover, provided they're all used on the first day issue of that particular postmark. And besides the first day covers themselves, the exhibit can include material that's used in the design or development of the cover, and that could include artist drawings, it could include essays of the cachet on the first day cover, and all of that type of material. So there are 3 subclasses in our first day cover class in Australia. The first one is the traditional first day cover, and the souvenir covers the first day covers. And the second one, B, is the souvenir covers and postmarks, as described earlier. But then the option is for a thematic or topical exhibit incorporating combinations of those covers. So you choose a topic, whatever your favorite topic is, and you illustrate it using first day covers, including the souvenir covers and the like. So we've mentioned already, really, that the first day cover should be franked with postally valid stamps. No restrictions on the dimensions of the cover. The first day cover can be officially or privately produced. So you could buy it from Australia Post, or it could be, as was very common before about 18, before Australia Post started issuing specific covers for each issue. There are many more privately produced covers around, so it can be privately produced covers and a study of the covers of, say, the Wesley Cover Service, or as they're the Philatelic Society of Canberra, which would make a nice one-frame display, provided you could find some. It can be about the cover can have a cachet on it, as is quite common. The cachet is the printed illustration, usually on the left-hand side. But a first day cover can be generic cachet, or there can be no cachets, or there can be hand-drawn ones. This is particularly in America for a given issue. In the US, you can get a whole range of first day covers, and many of them nicely illustrated, either hand-colored or silk printed. It can be addressed or unaddressed. In Australia, for many periods, you had to address the first day covers, even if they handed it back to you over the counter. But unaddressed ones are more common now. Signatures, as in autographs, are welcome in this class on the first day cover, but they must relate to the stamps or the cover, or they have to have some sort of relevance to the cover that you're showing. And all items should be shown with the postmark displayed, but if you're doing thematic exhibits, you can just show a photocopy of the postmark side of the card if you've got a picture on the back that you're using as your thematic, part of your thematic story. That's actually a précis of the various details that are in the rules. And as I said, if you are judging it or going to exhibit in the class, you do need to consult the rules more carefully. Here's the point scheme. There's a slight difference between straight first day covers and souvenir covers and the thematic type subclass. The thematic subclass has to have a plan, which is essentially similar to a thematic plan, whereas that's not the case with the other subclasses. Otherwise, the points do come out more or less similar to what you've been used to in many of the classes. So yes, this is a comment on the plan for the thematic, and some general comments. Applies to all plans, but the rules do say that it should be agreement between the title, the plan, and the contents of the exhibit, and include a logical classification adapted to the storyline. So knowledge and research, you've got the knowledge about the stamp and when it was first issued that correlates with the postmark on the first day cover. But then you've also got knowledge relating to the production of the first day cover itself. So ideally, you would say who the printer was, the designer, the printing style, and the quantity issued, and other such details. Now, you may be able to find that information relatively easily for material issued by, say, Australia Post or other post offices, but finding it for private producers can be quite difficult. Some of the major Australian producers are relatively well known, but you still might not know who the printer was or who designed it or how many were produced. But obviously where you can find that, then you would score or where the exhibitor has shown that, you would score them more highly on research than if they hadn't. It seems to me that back in the 60s or thereabouts and 50s, almost every stamp dealer produced their own first day covers. And say if you're doing Papua New Guinea first day covers, finding out who actually produced the cover is actually quite difficult. So I've actually said most of that. For a given first day cover, there can be a number of variants produced, and you'd expect the exhibitor to go through those if they were showing private first day covers. They may comment on the scarcity of each variant. The number printed isn't necessarily correlates with the scarcity, but it's a matter of what can be found. The first day cover, and I'm assuming the dates are right, but I haven't checked them, from the Papua New Guinea Jubilee issue, or the Papuan issue, sorry, the Jubilee issue. Doesn't have a cachet, still a first day cover, and shows the set of the stamps. Coming back to knowledge and research, you've also got the postmark to talk about. One thing that is commented on in the SREV's first day covers is that if anyone attempts to enhance the postmark on the cover, as in rather as falsification, and they would be penalised for doing so. I very rarely judge first day covers, but I have seen that type of enhancement in maximathlete, and occasionally you see it in postal history or markophilie as well. So it's generally very much frowned upon. They allow cancellations by post offices established abroad, such as at stamp exhibitions, where they have a booth and they cancel stamps there. And although it's not required in the way it is in maximathlete, concordance of stamp, postmark, and cachets encouraged. Also, demonstrating the impact of transition from addressed to unaddressed first day covers, so you would expect the exhibit to be commenting on that transition if they've got an exhibit in the relevant period. And essentially what was happening, the rules changed, well, in Australia, for example, so that you could start getting unaddressed first day covers cancelled over the post office counter and handed back to you, rather than them having to be addressed. What I've gone through is actually the rules. There's a whole set of guidelines which goes through many of the same points, but includes some other points. And tonight, I think that's probably just too much to go through those. But if you are judging, you should refer to them, or if you're creating an exhibit. So I think we should have any questions about first day covers.
Just a quick comment, Ian. I had to go at first day covers by putting in the first 10 years of Ghana, because that's one of my favourite collections. And the feedback that I got was very interesting. Remove all the proofs and put it into Frugal, and this should do very well. So I will enter it into Sydney as a Frugal first day cover with no proofs in it, and let's see how it goes.
So that's an interesting point, though. So if you remember, I said in Frugal, your exhibit's judged in your class. So it's going to be judged to the first day cover anyway.
Yep.
So what difference should that make?
Well, it means that the value would go out, and they think that I might do it. But like anything, I'll give it a go. I don't take it personal, and see how it goes in Frugal, because I'm sure none of it's worth $200 per frame. So I think that's right. That criteria.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also sorry for the lack of face, but I also think it's worth mentioning that there are different first day cover rules. It's one of the few areas where different countries have definitely got different rules. The America, the China, the New Zealand, they're all slightly different. And what we've been through is the Australian ones. But
yeah, so that's correct. And they're actually not slightly different. They're very different.
Yeah.
I
just thought it was worth mentioning.
It is worth mentioning. So if you ever go to another country to judge, we have had a system of court judges to and from countries like the US and the UK and the like, and the US rules are quite different. But again, part of the judge's job is to read the American rules if you're going to judge there. They're online. The Americans have an exhibiting handbook that you can download, and you could have a look at their first day cover rules. Ours are very different. Denise, what happens in New Zealand?
They are similar to Australia, but I did point out a couple of years ago to a judge's training that they were slightly different. Yes. I'm sort of had a little bit more experience than most, because one time I have done some judging in Australia was in Adelaide, and there were half a dozen first day cover
Yep.
entries that I judged at the time, whereas the others haven't been. We don't have many in New Zealand to judge, and so unless they've been put in a team to do it in Australia, they haven't had any experience.
Yeah. So just to very quickly mention that, as Glenn said, there is a first day cover class at the FIAP exhibition in Shanghai, and they have a set of rules. What happens is when you FIP and FIAP experiment with a new class, they call them experimental rules. And any exhibition actually can come up with a class if it wishes and come up with an experimental set of rules that they have to still be approved by FIP or FIAP for that exhibition, but they only apply to that exhibition. And so the Shanghai rules are much simpler than the Australian rules. They do have some unusual features, but it's an experimental class at that point. It doesn't mean that FIP or FIAP will adopt those particular rules, but the process, as Bruce alluded to it with the open rules, that as the class moves from an experimental class to actually being an official class, the rules are adapted along the way, and hopefully as people learn by applying those rules at the original exhibitions. Again, this class was developed, the Americans have said it for a long time, but we've adopted in Australia partly because there's so many people who collect first day covers, and we were hoping that many of them would become exhibitors. It hasn't happened to the extent that we would like, but nevertheless, it's available there for people to get involved in if they wish.
I think Australia is one of those countries that has had a period where there are a lot of privately made first day covers.
Yes, it did.
From artists.
Yes.
And it caters well for those people.
That's right.
Sorry, Ian, would you be able to include in this class things like postal numismatic covers?
Well, if they're actually a first day cover, then the answer will be yes.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily all first day covers, though.
No, but where you've got, say, a coin and a stamp,
yeah,
commemorating something, and they're issued on the same day.
Well, we're talking about the stamp. So that what's make it. The first day cover is a stamp cancelled on its day of issue.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Cobb & Co. P&Cs that Post is producing for Canberra Stamp Show won't be first day covers because the stamps are already out.
Unless it's the cancellation that's the first day of usage of that cancellation.
Thank you, Stephanie. You're totally right. If you're putting it there for the cancellation, then that would be true. I think the cancellation that they're likely to use will be the first day cancel for Canberra Stamp Show, which has a theme of Cobb & Co. So you could put it in the exhibit for the cancellation first day. But that may not be the case with some other P&Cs that have been produced and cancelled other than on the first day of issue. So the rules are actually quite technical in a way.
That's interesting, and I've never considered, but all these exhibition special postmarks, which we've all, bought because we've had to, I think the word is, but, collected over the years of, first day of issue, they are in fact a first day, you could have almost a themed exhibition of.
So you could. So if you've got a 4-day exhibition where you've got the same postmark, then all those cancelled on the first day could go on the first day out at the Australian first day cover class. In an exhibition like Canberra, where the postmarks are all different, then basically any cover cancelled at the exhibition.
Interesting.
Would be go on the first day cover class. So yes,
finally a use for these things.
Yes, here you go, Stephanie. We expect to see 8 frames of Australian Philatelic first day covers based on the cancellations.
They might give me the same advice they gave Glenn.
They might do. But if they're P&Cs in the present P&C market, you might fail the Frugal test.
Oh.
Okay, well, might move on to the next class. Cinderellas. I'll go through first. Hopefully most of you have some understanding what Cinderellas are. So they're the stamps and labels and seals and things which resemble postage stamps, but are not postage stamps and not revenue stamps. I'll go through some of the types of Cinderellas, but there are just so many of different types. It's anything that fits that very broad definition. As we've discussed earlier when we're talking about, we'll probably be talking about revenues, but well, first of all, I'll say that once upon a time, when this class started, revenue stamps were actually regarded as Cinderellas because there was no revenue class. That was a long time ago now, but revenue stamps now have got their own class, so you don't put them in Cinderellas. Traditional has always been home for railway stamps, parcel stamps, carriage stamps, and the like that have a function similar to postage stamps, even if it's not the post office. But also bona fide local post stamps like Pete's Post and the Zemstvos would be put into traditional rather than Cinderellas. The regulations are restricted to Australian national and state exhibitions. It's very much an Australian class. There's some talk of extending the FIP revenue class to some types of Cinderellas. The rules do say that you can put registration labels and perfums and things like that into Cinderellas as well if they don't find a home. But they're things which are also possible that you may fit into, depending on how you did it, into postal history or postal history, social or traditional. When the rules were written, perfums were still looked down upon. They're now regarded much more favourably. And registration labels, well, it depends what you're doing. It clearly could be postal history if you've got covers, registered covers. It could be social if you did it right. But let's just have a quick whiz through the various types of Cinderellas. Well, fantasy and bogus stamps, there's so many hundreds of them, everything from the Hutt River province to the ones up here from Taiwan. That envelope, the postage is actually paid by the Taiwanese stamp in the bottom left hand corner. The two of them there that pay the postage. And the other stamps are purely fantasy stamps created by this person in Taiwan. This person prints, as you can gather, quite a lot of fantasy stamps, including reprints of Australian revenues. The Gay Kingdom, the home of the Black Opal Lightning Ridge stamps in inverted commas, and the Hutt River province. So they're all bogus and fantasy stamps, and they could make very good Cinderella exhibits. Seals and fundraising stamps, the classic TB seals that come from many countries, very much collected, say, in the US and catalogue. You can get a catalogue of them in the US. Those issued in the US, but issued in other countries, similar things from Europe and Denmark and the like. And one there from the Queensland Chest and Lung Association. And koala research stamps issued for, well, fundraising, really. Exhibition souvenirs, well, the field as that is so enormous. One's from Australia 99, actually produced by Post. But exhibition souvenirs, and one from the Christchurch Philatelic Society. Another category that's there are a lot of, and you could do a display of, would be the saving stamps. I happen to show one which is on cover and doesn't pay postage, but has been lightly cancelled by the post office. And of course, if you're showing saving stamps, you're often putting saving stamps into books or cards, and then you go and collect something in return. And obviously, well, that sort of material can be shown in the Cinderella class as well. promotional labels, endless varieties from the ADTA Sydney Dental Exhibition in 81 through to a visit Toronto in Canada. The one at the top, used correctly, is a seal on the reverse of an envelope. So, besides the Cinderellas themselves, of course, you include anything related to production, like essays and proofs. You can have material on cover, examples of which I've just shown you. The point breakdown is very familiar. Treatment and importance, knowledge and research, condition, rarity, presentation. I'll just make a quick few comments. Treatment is really the same as it is in all the other classes, except it's Cinderella treatment, and the importance is importance to the field of Cinderellas. So traditional person might give some of it 1 or 2 points, but clearly, as a judge in Cinderellas, you would give it higher than that, depending on its importance of the exhibit and the importance of the subject. Knowledge and research, and I'll come back to that on the next page. But it's essentially similar as if you were drawing traditional, or potentially you could do a usage, if you like, display of how equivalent to postal history in Cinderellas, and condition and rarity are the same. The question really is, well, how do you find out information on these things? Because most traditional postage stamps and postal stationery are issued by governments and post offices, and you've got archival records on the subject. You've got post office publications and new issue guides, and in general have absolutely nothing like that for almost all of the Cinderellas. They're privately produced, so it can be almost impossible to find out who printed them, what the designer was. You can certainly comment on, the perforations and the like on the material that you've got, but finding out the other information is very difficult. So perhaps the judge might be a little gentler than they might be in traditional, but on the other hand, where it is known and where people have done the research to find it, which basically means coming across the archive of whoever produced them, then clearly they should be rewarded. But a related thing for a judge is, well, how do I find out information if I'm going to judge it? Because you then have the same problems. In Australia, there have been a couple of general books on Cinderellas published a long time ago by Hornich. There have been some interesting Cinderella columns in Stamp News over a period by people like Bill Hornich again, but Tony Pressgrave and Vito Milano in recent times. They can give you a feel for the Cinderellas that have been produced, mainly Australia, but in other countries. But then there are journals from the Cinderella Cinderella Stamp Club, which has an interesting journal, which has some good articles in it. There's a similar society in the UK, and there's a society in the US as well. To make 2 comments, one of the most amazing Cinderella books I've ever seen was The Field Guide to the Cinderella Stamps of Canada. It's not comprehensive in that it lists every Cinderella stamp ever issued in Canada, because it's like Australia, that would be impossible, but it does go through all the main categories and the main producers. And is a really fascinating book to go through. And there was someone in Brisbane who published something called the World Cinderella News. It didn't last very long, but to encourage people to get his newsletter, he used his own post to pay the postage, if you like, from home to the letterbox, and produce some nice Cinderellas that went out on the envelopes for the Brisbane Town Post. And if you want to find out about them, well, the first thing, there are a couple of articles in the Australian Cinderellas magazine on the topic. There are copies of the World Cinderella News, not complete set, but there are a few in the National Library. So it is possible at times, as with all these topics, it is possible to find more than you think you're going to, but the exhibitor has to try and find it, and certainly it should be rewarded if they've gone to the effort to do the research. So we don't see many Cinderella exhibits, but I can remember quite a few at an exhibition in Adelaide some years ago, and some of them have been very interesting. It is suitable in many cases for a one-frame exhibit if you take a particular Cinderella or a small group of Cinderellas. And some of those exhibits have been very interesting indeed. So any questions on Cinderellas?
Yes, and in relation to perfins, would that mainly be the private perfins issued by companies, say on postage stamps?
We can see what other people think. When the rules were written, I think that, as I said, perfins weren't as accepted as they are now. I would have thought generally that would be probably what, traditional or?
Well, that's what I was thinking because,
Yeah.
you know, in my, exhibit, the George V, you've got the Commonwealth and state punctures of the stamps.
Well, they would certainly be traditional.
Sorry?
That's certainly traditional, but I think the private perfins would be accepted in traditional now.
You think so, rather than Cinderellas?
Yeah, I wouldn't put them into
Researching the
Cinderellas.
company
No.
and
Other people could give an opinion, but so Glenn, any comments on perfins?
No, but I would be putting perfins into traditional because I think I've seen more perfins in traditional over the last 10 years than ever in Cinderella. But I mean, of course, you've got Cinderellas that have perfins.
Oh, well, they go into Cinderellas, yes. But as I said, well, the general point is that as a judge, you have to remember that the classes change, both in the actual rules and in how they're interpreted and what is accepted. And the Cinderella rules are very old rules. And when they were written, private perfins were not as well accepted as they would be now. So I think now I'd certainly put them in traditional and not Cinderellas.
But say if you did an exhibit on, say, one particular company, its history, and that they perforated stamps, for their private use. That wouldn't go in traditional, would it? Or go into Cinderella?
Well, it might actually be better, depending on what you're planning to put in it, to going into social.
Oh, right, yeah.
Or possibly even open, but social would be a possibility.
Yeah.
You'd have to have, particularly if you had a lot of covers, particularly if they had illustrated covers, and you could use stamp to order stationery as well, because they were issued often for one of the reasons for stamp to order stationery was similar to private perfins, although there's other reasons as well. But again, in current fashions and current way, I probably wouldn't try and put them into Cinderellas. But
no, thank you.
So one of our other classes is polar philately. And polar, in some ways, there's similarities to open. But we do have a separate polar class. I know that a couple of Canberra exhibitions had quite a lot of polar exhibits, and it was a major theme of a couple of our exhibitions. It's not quite so popular now, but there is a polar society still in Australia. And a couple of the overseas exhibitions have had what they call polar salons, where they've got an exhibit class specifically aimed at polar exhibits. The main point about polar philately is, as the name implies, it's material that relates to the Arctic and Antarctic, that including the subarctic and subantarctic areas. By that's meant subantarctic islands like Macquarie Island and the Chatham Islands and various other islands around New Zealand and South Georgia, for example, over in the Falklands, and similarly other islands. So they're regarded as the subantarctic. The material that can be put into the polar class can come from any of the other classes. So you could, if you wish, do a traditional exhibit based on stamps such as the ones on the left from King Edward VII land, which were part of a British Antarctic exhibition. Expedition, not expedition, expedition. Or you could do a postal history display of legitimate commercial mail coming out of the Australian Antarctic bases, or first day covers. Or in fact, as it says quite clearly, flexibility is the rule rather than the exception. So you can choose how to organize your material. Obviously, the exhibitor has got to produce a logical treatment of whatever they're doing. But one other thing about polar, it clearly states that exhibits in polar philately have to be judged solely as polar philately. So it's not a matter of, like we had in Frugal, where you put in a traditional exhibit, it's judged in traditional but becomes polar. It's all judged as polar, regardless of what type of presentation, what type of material you've included. And you can have mixtures. You can have partly traditional and partly a postal history type display. So it's very flexible. And the one guiding principle is that it relates in some way to the Antarctic and the Arctic or the Arctic. So, as I said, stamps and covers, all types of cachets and markings, related support material. So like open, it allows non-philatelic material. So correspondence, newspaper articles, photographs, pictures of bases, personnel, ships and wildlife. Like in open, where possible, these should be original items, but scans and photocopies and photographs that are not original are allowed, but should be reduced in scale by 25% from the originals. But they are allowed if they're important in telling the story. The stamps can either be stamps that are used in the Arctic or Antarctic, or they could be stamps that have polar bears on them and glaciers and Antarctic themes and expeditioners and the like. And of course, if you're allowed to have the adhesive stamps, then you can have the proofs and trials and imperforates and miniature sheets, and you would expect the exhibitor to talk about printing methods and paper varieties and perforations and the like. So it lends itself to a two-style treatment where you've got if you like, the storyline about the Arctic as the main storyline, but the philatelic detail is included about the material that you put in. It specifically talks about things like telegrams and radio message forms, and about any mail, in fact, dispatched or carried to or from the polar regions. So the hope, well, yeah, you can, modern Antarctic stuff in Australia or Ross dependency in New Zealand are cancelled. They don't go to Antarctica at all. The Australian ones are cancelled at Kingston. So covers that have actually been down and posted, for example, by people at the bases, may count for more. And of course, picture postcards. So not specifically, it talks about cards, but picture postcards of Arctic subjects have often been included in open exhibits. I think that's repeating most of the same things. And of course, you've got all the expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctic, scientific and tourist. So when Tony Shields goes on his next expedition, you could put in a request for material for him to bring back. Again, how you arrange the exhibits is largely up to the exhibitor. It's a very flexible class. It can be chronological, geographical, topical, or any other way that the exhibitor may feel appropriate. That's actually what the guidelines say. So the point is, though, of course, that that's all very well and good, but you would still expect the exhibitor to come up with a storyline that flowed. You had a plan and you had a treatment that made sense and was easily followed by the judge. and the comments there about the reproduction I've mentioned. There is a rule that says ephemera should not exceed 50% of the total exhibited material, but I think that's effectively treated much as it is an open, that you don't get to the stage where you're counting the number of items, but you get an overall impression that there's still a lot of philatelic material that would make half or more of the exhibit. And what do people think? Would you use the postcard on the left in your polar exhibit?
Probably not in, unless the message on the back has something to do with the story.
Okay, so that's a fair point. Two of these turned up in circuit books one day in Canberra, and the other one has a message, and I'm pretty sure it was Edward. What's his name?
Mawson.
No, the other one, Edward Davis.
Oh.
Anyway, one of the other people who was part of his expeditions was the message on the back basically said, "Why don't we go out and do some climbing together?" And which Edward David, one of the other Antarctic explorers. So you might argue that that has some more relevance than the message on the back of this, which it doesn't relate to polar at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, the addressee is Douglas Mawson when he was at the University of Adelaide. Again, the criteria and the points look very much like many other classes, with treatment and importance, and then knowledge and research, condition, rarity, and presentation. Again, the knowledge includes the knowledge of the subject that that the exhibitor is presenting, as well as the more traditional philatelic knowledge. Rarity can be hard to determine in the case of the non-philatelic material, in the same way as Bruce was talking about an open. But quite a lot of the early material relating to polar explorers is quite rare. In some cases, the number of stamps for King Edward VII Land were well known, the number of covers is well known, but in many other cases that's not so. So any questions on polar? There have been some wonderful polar exhibits over the years, particularly from the Dwyers. But at one stage, the Polar Society was very active in exhibiting. New Zealand has polar too. Denise, any comments on the polar rules in New Zealand?
Currently, we don't have any. They're being written. And I think I'm not even sure if polar is a class at Royal Peaks next year. I'm not sure. Usually if someone enters it, it goes in other.
Yeah. There was some talk of New Zealand.
The Federation has agreed to put it into our rules. So whenever the next New Zealand exhibition is, which there isn't one planned at this stage, past next.
Yeah, and I think our discussions with the New Zealand Federation was using our rules and looking at them. They felt they were probably a bit easier than the previous New Zealand rules.
How do you find the rules? Diane's one of our polar exhibitors. How do you find them, Diane?
Hi, Stephanie. Yeah, I think they're good actually. Once I'm getting more experienced, I suppose, at exhibiting, so I try and use all the rules in for open that covers basically every sort of topic. Also, Ian, you mentioned that there was polar bears in Antarctica, but they're in the Arctic.
They're in the Arctic, yes.
I was wondering, Diane, are you coming to Canberra, and are we going to have to judge polar there?
Yes.
Well, there you go, guys. I just thought I'd give everyone that warning.
I've got a
Yes.
file coming, so.
Yeah.
And I exhibited that in our state show, Swampex, Swan River Stamp Show, sorry, and I got a gold for that, so I was very happy with that outcome.
Yeah, not only that, she got best in show, so it's a pretty good exhibit.
Thank you, Glenn. So you'll see it there, Stephanie, and I think you may see some improvements from when I exhibited in the Perth 23 show. If you'll go.
Looking forward to it, and thank you, Ian, for helping us.
Okay, so Stephanie says something about topical, but I'll just have a quick couple of comments.
You might find from that, I don't know if you managed to just go back one slide, Ian, to the picture of the basic difference, though, all I wanted to say was that the basic difference between thematics and topical is that instead of a story, you must have a classification. And that's a good example of a classification.
So the difference between topical and thematic is relatively easy to understand if you talk about things like birds and fishes and cars. The topical exhibit is based on oftentimes the classification used for birds and animals and the like is the taxonomic classification. So we had an exhibitor a long time ago in Canberra who had a wonderful exhibit of birds of the world. He was an amateur ornithologist, and the exhibit was purely done on taxonomy. So that means, you'd have the penguin stamps and the different types of penguins, king penguins, emperor penguins, and lily penguins. And then you might have the grebes and the cormorants and the pelicans. The stamps either, they all had the relevant bird on it, maybe possibly eggs of that bird, but it was done in a classic style like that. And similarly, bridges you can do in types of bridges, and cars, you can go through all the different Holden model cars if you can find the stamps. Whereas in thematics, you have to have a story. So you can't just show the birds of the world based on a taxonomic classification. You have to have a storyline to it. So you might have the life of birds that means that you talk about how birds developed, and you would have stamps with dinosaurs on it, and then you'd have some birds, but you'd say, well, what the birds eat. So you'll have stamps with frogs and rabbits and seeds and fruit and whatever else. And then you might have humans and birds, and you'll have stamps with farms and whatever. But you've got a strong storyline going through it rather than just a straight classification. And the same would apply to anything like that with bridges or cars or gemstones or whatever else. And that was but only part of what Stephanie was talking about in her matrix of what each of the three types of exhibits were about.
Just to say that the other major ones on that page, and that is that although the material rules are the same as thematics, in topical, all your material must relate to your topic, whereas in thematic they can deviate because they're telling a story. So all stamps don't have to have chess on them if you're doing a thematic on the story of chess, whereas in topical they do. But in reality, they're very similar.
Yes, and oftentimes a subject might be able to be treated in both ways, although the material you would need would be different. And that's just a random thematic plan. But you could imagine perhaps different types of ceramics as a topical, but this then goes on to more of a story, as makes it a thematic. We haven't had a lot of takers yet in this class, and I still think we need a few people to do it and come up with great topical exhibits to make it clearer to people what they're meant to be showing.
I'm nodding.
Good. I can't see you.
There were more topical exhibitors 30 years ago before the thematic rules developed.
Yeah, so the person I was talking about from Canberra from a long time ago, and no, it's not me, his name was Steve Wilson. He exhibited in what was then the thematic class using under the old rules, with an exhibit based on taxonomy, which is what we're now calling topical. And in fact, when the rules changed, he tried to convert it to a thematic, but because he had that way of thinking that an amateur ornithologist would have, he couldn't do it. He tried, but he didn't like doing it. He didn't succeed that well, and he gave up.
We have a current problem, and it's the problem you'll find judging thematics, that a lot of thematic collectors get told that they don't have enough of a story, that they're really doing topical. I am trying my utmost best to persuade the thematic group in FIP to have a subclass of thematics called topical, because in reality there's only the difference of the story and the classification. Yes.
So
and I think it would work.
When the rules changed from what we're calling topical to thematic many years ago, that's exactly what they should have done. They shouldn't have.
They should have.
Got rid of, if you like, exhibitors who wanted to show that way. They should have allowed both to happen.
I agree with you, Ian. The trouble is, though, that they perceive that they have made many steps forward and they have, in terms of material and things like that, and the recognition of postal stationery and postal history and stamps as being the foundations of a good exhibition and the way you write up these items. And some of them see that introducing topical philately is going back to an old school of thematics, which is not, I don't think, is necessarily true.
It doesn't have to be the case.
No, I know, but I need to convert a lot of people to this way of thinking.
I think it's also in the APF, reintroduced topical because a lot of new collectors collect that way.
That's right.
Particularly,
That's right.
And so what we're doing is encouraging people to start an exhibit with your collection first, rather than going out and buying material to do a really good exhibit, because it's really the skill of exhibiting in any class can then be transferred to the skill to those other classes. So
with cats, you could have types of cats, Len, all the different breeds, all the different species of cats.
You've seen the tail, have you?
Yeah. We've got a couple at the west that are developing. We've got one on butterflies, which is done by species, by continent, and I think that will be a good one when she gets around to it. Yeah. One of the common problems that collectors have is they buy a set with that stamp in it, and they want to show the set, but in fact, the other stamps may not have any relevance to that.
No, species. So I remember from Steve Wilson, his comments at the time, and showing his display to the Canberra Society, he commented that one of the problems he had was that, he'd buy 4 stamps, a whole set, and then only one of them would go into the exhibit, and what do you do with the rest? So what Steve did, being the sort of person he was, he actually kept all the other stamps, so that when he came to sell the material, he was able to take the bird stamp from his exhibit, reunite it with the rest of the set, which meant that he could sell the set again to normal stamp collectors.
Yeah.
So he did that quite religiously.
And I think we're trying to discourage people putting in first day covers where they've got all those other stamps on, and try to find a commercial cover with just that one.
Yeah, no, well, that's what.
But it's the same. Right. Remember, Glenn, it's the same rules as thematics. First day covers are not really appreciated. You can show them, but not going to be appreciated. You may as well show them in stamp, because that's far better, unless it's a commemorative cancel.
Yeah.
And we have to be very strict on that. And that's one of the things you be careful with the new exhibitors. It's maybe good for their collection, but it's not good for them to write up as new exhibitors, just like thematics isn't, because they have to have stationery, they have to have the full range of material, they have to have the full age of material, and they have to write those items up as if they were in the class that they belong to, just like we heard in open, same as in thematics. And that's not easy. So they need mentoring. They need mentoring, that's all. They need a help.
They're the exhibiting skills that everyone has, all the exhibitors have to develop in every class, or almost every class.
Well, yes, except they have to learn all the classes, but yes, you're right.
Yeah, well, that's right, like thematics. And open, for that matter.
But hold their hands and encourage them to come along, because I think it should, as Glenn says, a lot of their material will help. A lot of them, unfortunately, have only been collecting stamps, and we have to convince them that postal stationery and covers and things like that are good as well. They're needed.
And the topical points are, again, as you'd expect, really.
Same as thematics.
Same as thematics. You get 35 for treatment, including title, plan, and development. Knowledge and research is split between philatelic knowledge and subject knowledge, and condition, rarity, and presentation are the same as in all classes. So I'd encourage you all also to think about new classes we could have. We need more classes, don't we, Glenn?
Yeah, we sure do.
We're losing some to the FIP. So.
Yeah. Well, I think even our one framers, we lost that to FIP as well. So, you know, we've got to stop coming up with new ideas that are going to get stolen internationally.
Well, there's a big push at the moment for people who want something to do with P&Cs, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, don't laugh. I'm serious. I'm
yes,
serious.
well, Stephanie, you could write some rules.
I could. I know a lot of people who have been collecting them, and they're very, very popular at the moment. And they say, well, you know, where can I show them? What can I do with them?
Yeah, well, possibly the first day cover class in some cases.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Possibly some of them, odd one could go into open, depending on your subject.
I have someone, well, there's a challenge here, and I have someone who wants to tell the story of P&Cs in Australia, and they have the material and they don't know which class to put it in, and I'm damned if I could think what to tell them to do.
Just enter it, and that'll get thrown into traditional, and it's there.
And get nothing. Yes, I know. I know.
Well, at least
postal history too, see you.
Oh, well, you'd have to be very innovative about how you wrote it up. It doesn't pass the test of P&Cs are not actually intended to go through the mail, but
there's also people that collect correspondence, and there's not really a way of showing a set of correspondence.
No, so America has always had a display class, which was basically anything. So it is possible to judge, even in Australia, things under a sort of another category, whether it's called a special study or whatever. But
any of you guys familiar with post crossing or with postcards?
Yeah,
I know of it.
Yeah, I've got a girl over here who a keen post crosser, and she's collected postcards during COVID-19 that tell the story from all over the world of the people's stories during lockdown and getting COVID, and even having someone in their family die from COVID. And she we can't really find a class for her to display this other than just saying, well, it makes a nice display for a talk.
So they're all on postcards, all used through the mail?
Yes.
Well, why couldn't you put it into Postal History Social?
Yeah. I think it would fit quite good, because that's actually a good story of use of postage through a period.
It certainly fits the rule
pandemic.
if it's written up properly.
Yeah.
There was certainly something quite quite prevalent. I think it sort of post-crossing took off quite well during
Yes.
COVID when everybody had nothing else to do.
Get her to put a
New Zealand's
frame
just
together.
issued
Mm.
New Zealand's just issued a postal card for post-crossing.
Yes, this lady Louise, so she's been involved with that with the New Zealand Post guy.
Yes.
And when the New Zealand Post yearbook comes out, she's written a blurb page about the post-crossing stamp.
It actually even has a proper indicium on it for $3.30.
Yep, it's the only rate you can use $3.30 for, because it's I think $3.60 to send a letter
Yes.
to Australia deal. But the postcard rate was kept at $3.30 specifically for post-crossing.
Okay.
Because Anthony Harrison, who's in charge of the New Zealand Post Collectibles, he's the post crosser there who's pushed this through. It's actually our second post crossing stamp, because the first one was issued at NZ 2023.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, there's a adhesive stamp and a postal card.
Mm. Yeah, and I've been corresponding with some females in philately who are into a thing called stamp art, if you've come across it.
Yeah.
So and that is another very popular thing at the moment. So if we're trying to encourage people to take part in exhibiting, I guess we ought to get involved in the what's trending at the moment. So maybe we need a class called, as you say, Ian, called other, but not quite other, studies of, modern philately studies, something, I don't know what to call it. Find me a better.
It has in other countries and at times been called special studies, display class, other.
Yeah.
But yes, you could find something a little bit more innovative as a name. I probably wouldn't restrict it just to modern, though.
No, I wouldn't either. It's just that, I didn't
it
mean
could
modern,
be used for anything.
currently in favour, or whatever the word is.
Yes.
That part is flying, and so are P&C at the moment, and I don't know what to tell people to do with them.
P&Cs might give us some link to the coin collectors. Some people want to encourage that.
Well, in fact, it has to, because some of the P&Cs are valuable, apparently, because of the scarcity of the coin and not because of the stamp part.
Yes, that's true. And in fact, if you had a P&C class, you would have to display numismatic knowledge too.
You would.
Yep.
You would.
Yep. All right, Ian, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm
Okay.
going to stop recording and then we can just have general questions.